Have you done all 100 things?
Right, that's a great question. Everybody always asks. I think I literally have shopped or been in 98 of 100.
Where do you find a family of communities connected by the storied Mississippi River, where young explorers and dreamers, investors and entrepreneurs thrive? Where can you connect with real people living and creating in a place that's as genuine as it is quirky? QC. That's where.
Welcome to QC That's Where. I'm Katrina, your host. I'm so excited to be here today with Jonathan Turner, digital news reporter at WHBF, journalist for a long time, author, and very experienced quad citizen. Jonathan, hello.
Thanks for having me, Katrina. Great to see you.
Yes, great to see you. This podcast, we've been wanting to do this for a long time coming, which has given me lots of time to look through the 100 things to do in the Quad Cities Before You Die book that you have published. When did this come out, John?
It technically was released the end of August last year.
Okay.
So I think they timed it beginning of September. But I got my first copies the end of August of last year. Very exciting.
So this book is super fun, and if you are a quad citizen, there's a lot to look through here, and you can probably check off a lot of these things quickly. And if you are not from here, definitely a great tool to help you kind of make your way through a visit for a weekend, or if you're going to be here for longer. There's so much. So Jonathan, before we dive into 100 things, can you give us kind of an overview of your writing history and how you got to be where you are right now at WHBF?
Well, I've lived in the Quad Cities since the fall of 1995. My wife and I are both from the Midwest. I grew up in Milwaukee and she's from Chicago. I got into writing really during college. I was an undergrad at Oberlin in Ohio. I'm a musician by background. I played piano since I was about 5 and a half, and I love writing about music. And I started in college mainly writing about the arts, and I've continued really especially writing about the arts and culture my whole career. But I went to grad school at Indiana in Bloomington, which has a great journalism program. Met my wife at Indiana. I wrote for the school paper there. And then after grad school, started an internship at a daily paper in Connecticut, and lived in Connecticut from 88 through 95. When I got the job in the Quad Cities, I started writing for the Dispatch and Argus in the Quad Cities. Had pretty much every beat except crime, I think, while I was at the paper there. I've written for newspapers most of my career in the Quad Cities. Like I said, I'm a musician, piano player by background, so I play a lot of music on the side. I've been the accompanist at Zion Lutheran Church in Davenport since 1999. I've played for musicals, choirs, instrumentalists, student contests. And I've been with WHBF here as a digital reporter since September of 2021, when I started full time, and just loving writing for the website, ourquadcities.com. And it's just been a great experience here.
So with your music background, I mean, does that help you kind of, seek out things to write about, or do people come to you and say, hey, I have a really good idea for a piece?
Well, there's so much going on in terms of the arts in the Quad Cities, and just since 95, I mean, even in the past five or 10 years, it's grown so much. But the Mark opened just a couple years before we moved here. I just did a couple of big features on the 30th anniversary of the Vibrant Arena at the Mark, which has had a number of names, which is reflected in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many things going on. It's a combination of what I hear. We always get press releases every day from organizations and places, promoting their latest events. But I'm on social media all the time, and I see what's going on, and people contact me. I hear about things, so it's a combination.
So your writing, like I've noticed, it looks like a labor of love, if you will. Because like when I am like for Visit Quad Cities, when I am online trying to, look up things going on kind of in collaboration with our event calendar, and I like Google an event happening, 9 times out of 10, something that you wrote about it will pop up, and your content is it's robust, it's long, it's got photos. And what was the analogy you used a little while ago when we were talking before? You said it's
Right.
not possible for you to write short.
Well, I do in my job, as a news reporter, I cover obviously non-arts, more
Yeah.
general news, and excuse me, I do, rewrites of press releases, and so I can write short. It's not my favorite. So the things that are just the basic news items, I do, the whole gamut from short to really long. But I really appreciate doing the in-depth features. But for me, especially with the 100 Things book, yeah, writing short to me is like trying to dance ballet in a phone booth. It's
I love
kind
that
of just
analogy so much. It just
hard to move and stretch your arms, stretch your legs, and so they give me a lot of freedom at WHBF to write the longer profiles and in-depth features, and they can run 1,500 to 2,000 words sometimes. And previously, before I wrote for the Channel 4 site, I wrote about 18 months for quadcities.com, which is a free arts and entertainment website that the former editor at the paper, former entertainment editor, Sean Leary, is overseeing. And he asked me to write for that after I was laid off from the paper right before COVID. And quadcities.com had that same philosophy in terms of writing really long. I remember I did my longest feature, I think, was a feature on the 100th anniversary of the Circa 21 building. I mean, Circa 21's been the dinner theater since '77, but it's called that because the theater itself opened as a film movie theater in 1921. So I think that was close to maybe 10,000 words, and that was
yeah.
like a book online.
Well, with something that holds so much weight for our community like Circa 21, I mean, it's such an established staple, like amenity. So it deserved the 10,000 word treatment, I think.
Oh, especially with what they went through with COVID and surviving, not closing.
Yeah.
The dinner theaters have closed all across the country, and they're just so unique. And like you said, they're a treasured institution in the Quad Cities. And 2021 was a hard year for a lot of people, and they definitely deserved having a in-depth profile.
Do you have a favorite article or, feature that you've written throughout your career?
I had a couple. I did a piece at the end of the year in 2022 on my favorite art stories of 2022, and two of my favorites, just because they're more recent, stood out. I got to interview the country star Margot Price, who grew up in Aledo. And so if you don't know, she's become very famous and very outspoken in the country music scene. She wrote her memoir that was released last year. She came to Prairie Lights in Iowa City, and I found out she was going to be in Iowa City. I've done, features on her over the years, and she's just a great person, just very friendly and down to earth. And, she has very kind of outspoken views, both on music industry and politics, and 2020 election. I remember doing a story with her. But anyway, I got to meet her, at the book signing, and I was the only media person there, which I was surprised.
Oh, yeah.
And, maybe a lot of people don't know who she is, but I've followed her career, and that was just a great story. I got to do an in-depth story on her online, and then do video segments that got to broadcast on air. And then in early September last year, I got to go to New York City as part of a trip where my wife and I went to a family wedding in Connecticut. And my parents were from New York City. So we always spent every year, like we took a trip out to see our grandparents. And in Queens, if you don't know, Bix Beiderbecke spent his last months in Sunnyside, Queens, and that's where he died in 1931. And I'd really always wanted to go visit the building where he lived. And Louis Armstrong, the famous jazz trumpeter, lived many years in Queens. And my grandparents, my mom's parents, lived in Flushing, Queens. So that's literally where my grandparents lived, is literally like 4 or 5 miles from the Louis Armstrong house, which is a museum. And it's a beautiful, it's kept exactly as Louis Armstrong and his wife lived there until 1971. Well, Louis Armstrong died in '71. And 4 miles west of there is the Big Spiderbeck apartment, which is obviously not a museum. It's not open to the public, but it has a plaque outside.
Mm.
So I did a characteristic for me. I did a long feature on the connection between Bix and Louis. They died
Okay.
years apart, but as you know, the 1971, the 40th anniversary of Bix's passing, that's when the Bix Jazz Festival was started in Davenport, because musicians from New Jersey came to pay tribute to Bix's grave. He's buried in Davenport. And so that was just, I actually I scheduled an interview with this Dixieland jazz band that's from Sunnyside, Queens, that's played at this jazz festival in Lindsay Park in East Davenport the last couple of years. And so I arranged to meet them in front of the Bix apartment building. And I didn't know they were going to bring their instruments. So it was the band leader, who's the bassist, the trumpeter, and the banjo player came with their instruments. And I asked them to play a song that I could video. And so they literally played like the first big single that Bix recorded. And it was just like the highlight of my career, and emotional just talking about it. So I did a feature where I included that video.
Yeah.
So that was one of my favorites.
That was an amazing surprise that they came and decided to play.
I was just expecting just to talk with them and
Of
I got
course.
insights on why are Bix and Louis so important. They were friends, they admired each other. They played with each other during Bix's brief life, and
Yeah.
and Armstrong, became this legendary worldwide amazing star, and Bix is obviously a star in the Quad Cities, but that was just really neat.
So if you're not yet convinced that Jonathan is an expert in all things Quad Cities, here you go. We have we have 100 things to do in the Quad Cities before you die.
Right? Good thing, before I forget, if you're going to ask, I haven't done signings for a while, but one of my next signings, I'm going to be at the Bix Jazz Festival at Rhythm City, August 3rd through 5th. So if you want to stop by at the Bix Jazz Festival, we'll have books available there.
Okay, perfect. So these books are also available on our website, on our merchandise Shopify website. And then we've got it in our Moline Destination Center, and then in our Union Station Destination Center in Davenport. So definitely come and check these out. So Jonathan, I want to ask you, do you have a favorite part of this book? I love that it is like divided based on kind of interest.
So yeah, let me tell you how it got started. I have to thank Visit Quad Cities was the catalyst for how the book came about, because Visit Quad Cities recommended me in it must have been summer of 21, I think. So before I had my full-time job, they recommended me to the publishers, Reedy Press. Reedy Press is based in St. Louis. So the 100 Things book is part of a series. So all the covers look similar. They have the similar layout with the bucket. And so I think didn't have any control over the bucket on the cover, but I'm pretty sure that's either Before You Die, Before You Kick the Bucket, or a bucket list of items you have to see. So Reedy Press asked me to put this together, and they have a formula. So every book is very tightly controlled according to this formula, where it's not only just 100 things, it's 5 categories. If you look in the table of contents, there are the different categories like shopping, food and drink, arts and culture, sports and recreation, history. So it was kind of a challenge, because you obviously could do 5, you could do 100 food and drink options in the Quad Cities, since there's so many options. So you had to equally, I don't think it's 20 per category. So there are 5 categories. And so I actually worked with your staff at Visit Quad Cities, was very helpful. Before I started writing, I had to figure out what the 100 items were going to be. So we kind of each put our list together. I worked with Dave Harrell, President and CEO of Visit Quad Cities. We kind of compared lists. They put a list together of what items they wanted to see. I had my list, and we kind of tried to hash it out, and they were very supportive, and we came up with that list. And then I had to do, each item had to be only about 150 words. text, which, like I said, is really a challenge. And that 150 words also had to include the address, phone number, and
Ah,
website for each item. Um, so I think my favorite, I mean, obviously, I think under history, since I'm a history buff, the Butterworth Center and Deer Wyman House are just must sees for anybody who lives
mhm.
here, visits Quad Cities. They're just such beautiful homes in Moline, and they're so important to the history of the Quad Cities. Um, in terms of restaurants and bars, I mean, one of the items is the views, drinks with a view. I can't remember what the headline was. Every
Yeah.
headline also had to be like a verb: do this, grab this, check this out, do.
Okay.
That was kind of a challenge, but
Yeah.
my two favorite kind of bar atmospheres are Up Sky Bar, downtown Davenport, and the River Room in at the Bend in East Moline.
And the
And
river room is included in
the
the
River
cover, right? In
Room
the 100?
is the cover photo, since they have great sunsets with their view looking west from the top floor. That's on the top floor of the Hyatt at the Bend in East Moline. Um, so those were easy, but the good thing about the 100 Things book was they let you, the publisher had freedom in terms of certain pages in the book have like tips or extra. If you like this, you can check this out. Or I think I had two of my favorite restaurants are Exotic Thai and Tantra in Davenport. And so I think on that item, I did a related, like it's a facing page where you could put, these are other like foreign foods or other international restaurants. It's a 2 pages. Right,
Yes.
other foreign flavors, right. So you can go around the world to different restaurants without leaving the Quad Cities. So,
Yes.
and if you look, Katrina, if you look in the index at the back of the book, so at the index where they, list all the items that are in the book, because I wrote about those related things, the index has, I think, 200 some items. So it's not limited to just 100, but
Right.
that was a way to get in more places.
So have you done all 100 things?
Right, that's a great question. Everybody always asks. I think I literally have shopped or been in 98 of the 100. I mean, I only included all the items because I had known their reputation, I knew their quality, or I knew they were popular. So I think the shopping and fashion were the biggest challenge in terms of coming up with a good number. I didn't necessarily include stores at the mall, since
Sure.
malls are pretty generic, even though there's some local. So there are a couple stores probably I haven't really shopped at, if I must. I don't want to mention the names, but um, one of the priorities for the book is obviously all of them are unique to the Quad Cities. There are no chain stores, there are no chain businesses, restaurants are all unique to the Quad Cities. So that was important, as with Visit Quad Cities, you want to really promote what's special and unique to the area.
Yeah, I was looking through the shopping section and I've probably made my way through about half of it. One of them I'm really curious about is Grasshopper in LeClaire.
Right, right,
I don't know if you've been there.
right. Well, there's a lot there, right.
Yeah, there's so
Um,
much, and like, and that, I love that aspect. 'Cause it's like, okay, you find something in the book, such as the grasshopper, and it could lead you there, which then once you get to that location, it just
when you're in
opens
that
your eyes.
town, you see what's nearby, and
Exactly.
especially
So
with
it's like it
so
doesn't
much.
necessarily all have to be written down black and white in this book to open your eyes to just the endless possibilities.
And one other challenge, which you may ask, but I have to mention, the book came out, like I said, last August,
Yeah,
and everything changes day by day. And it's a book that I think 2,000 copies were printed in the first run. And so once it's in print, you can't make changes unless you have another printing, which I'm not like author of Harry Potter, so they're not like flying off the shelves. But I have a website for the book that's 100thingsqc.com. So things change, like names of places. The Vibrant Arena was not the Vibrant Arena last August.
right.
River Music Experience in the book, they changed their name to Common Chord after the book came out. The Faithful Pilot restaurant closed, one of my favorite restaurants in LeClaire. Other things have changed. I just updated, I think just this morning, if you know the Mockingbird on Main, the theater in downtown Davenport was on the ground floor of the building that collapsed in downtown Davenport. And they obviously were going great last summer, and they're not there anymore. And so things change. There's if you go on the website, 100thingsqc.com, look at the top for updates. So I steer people to the updates page, and that has all the changes that have happened since the book came out.
Yeah, and like I guess the good thing about having like a copy that was one of the originals is it does serve as a historical reference of all the things that have been. And naturally, like you said, you know, restaurants and businesses change names and go in and out, but so it's not possible to keep it all 100% like, you know, on point all the time. But very cool to be able to look back and go, oh yeah, you know, Vibrant was, you know, Tax Slayer Center not so long ago, and it has morphed and changed. And I think that's a good sign of a healthy destination when there are, you know, when things change and things move and we're constantly making ourselves better. Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, the new daiquiri factory opened in downtown
Yes.
Davenport. They had closed in Rock Island, and so I mentioned them in the book, but the Davenport, their big place, was not open then. And
Right.
but it's great to see things grow and change in the Quad Cities, even if we lose some places.
So on the history note, I want to go back to something you wrote a little while ago, A Brief History of Bucktown. Can you talk about what the premise of that book was and kind of what inspired you to write it?
That came about. That's also a big publisher called History Press. They're part of Arcadia Publishing. They do those kind of sepia tone postcard books. They're like very popular at Walgreens. They're the brownish postcard books that there's several different books that are about different cities in the Quad Cities. And there's one, I think, about the Arsenal, about Scott County, about Chipianic Cemetery. But anyway, they had a division called that's called History Press. History Press reached out to me. This was 2014. I'd written a lot about the former Bucktown Center for the Arts in downtown Davenport, and they had heard about the reputation of Bucktown, and they commissioned me to write this book. It was a totally different process on the 100 Things book. 100 Things, I think I worked on for about September through May, finished in May of 22. And the Bucktown book was more formal history. It had to be, I think they gave me maybe 40,000 some words total, which, like, as you know, is no problem for me to write.
Right.
But that took about 18 months altogether to research, provide photos. I had to provide all the photos, both historic and I included contemporary. So that focus on the east end of downtown Davenport. It was a notorious kind of red light district at the turn of the 20th century. Davenport had legalized prostitution actually in the late 19th century. And it had quite a reputation as, you know, that area of downtown had like 40 brothels and 40 some bars just in that area of downtown. Downtown Davenport has a, you know, very rich history in terms of arts and culture. The Quad City Symphony Orchestra started, you know, like in 1915 at a former opera house downtown. There were many music societies and choral societies, and the Turner Society, not related to my family, but very strong in terms of German heritage, in terms of the intellectual and physical fitness and the amount of activities that they promoted. So it's really a history of, not just, the book was not just a chronological starting in like 1837 and then every year this happened or this happened. I thought it was more interesting to write in categories, kind of like the 100 Things, but the Bucktown book is divided by themes. Like, here's the history of the German American immigration, and this is the arts and culture chapter, and this is the chapter on prostitution. This is chapter on the battle over, prohibition. There are so many different prohibition battles with alcohol, and Davenport and Scott County were notorious for wanting the freedom to sell and consume alcohol. And I referred there's in the book, I can't remember the year, but there was actually a humongous parade in downtown Davenport that attracted thousands of people, like in support of, not anti-prohibition. And so you had the pro-alcohol forces against the temperance. The Women's Christian Temperance Association was literally founded in Davenport. So there were these huge battles, both, against alcohol, against prostitution. And there's some very colorful, doing the research, there are very colorful like editorials and stories that were in some of the Davenport papers. And there's a section of the book that there was a paper in Chicago that called Davenport the worst town in America.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
there was this famous bishop who railed against the evils of Davenport, and it was just really interesting. And so one of the prominent one of the business owners currently downtown is Dan Bush, and he owns Armored Gardens and Analog, and he was a big supporter of the Bucktown book, and he actually his company had T-shirts made that quoted that Chicago headline, Davenport, the worst town in America, in 1903. And Kyle Carter, who's the director of the Downtown Davenport Partnership, was very helpful and very supportive. I quote him a lot in the book. And he just he recognizes, the fun and we don't live in 1903, obviously, and things have changed so much, but who doesn't want to live in the, wickedest town in America that has that colorful history? And so people, a lot of people didn't know about Bucktown, and so they really wanted to promote what makes Davenport unique. And so I had a quote in the book where Kyle said, every town has a 53rd Street. Every town has a corridor of nameless, Costco's and Walmart's and every big box store. But what makes a city unique is the front door, is the downtown. And so if you see downtown, East 2nd Street is huge. It's like booming now with Raccoon Motel, Ragged Records, the new movie theaters going back in Woods are creating that independent movie house. The restaurants there, Half Nelson, Mississippi Valley Distilling has a lounge there. And so what makes a downtown or a city unique is that downtown, and to have that history behind it is just so interesting. So that book came out in, I think, September of 2016. And I got to have my first book signing was at the Bucktown Center, one of the art galleries.
Yeah.
And if anybody's a fan of Front Street Brewery, they have a beer called Bucktown Stout. So I bought, a bunch of, Bucktown Stout to serve as enticement for people, free samples to give out. And so that was a very interesting project. And it was, I don't know if it's sold as many as, 100 Things book is doing pretty well, but I think just that book was also, Bucktown was part of a series the History Press has. They contract with writers across the country, people who are passionate about history, and so they also feature, so it's not just cities, it's like the neighborhoods within cities.
Yeah.
You have a whole series like that.
Well, and it's so valuable to have that history, down, whether it's, on an upswing or a downswing for sales. It's so valuable to have that as part of our collection. Like over at Union Station, we have a collection of those books, like you said. And so having that as part of it is just such a great asset that we can share with people, whether they live here or not. And when you were writing that book, researching it, did you know a lot of that going in, or were you surprised by any of the stuff that you were finding out?
Oh, no. I knew that Bucktown had been this neighborhood and it was kind of famous that 100 so years ago. But it was very much like being a journalist overall. Being a journalist is a learning process. Like every day you're learning new things about your area.
Yeah.
And so it was, yeah, fascinating to do that research. And the Bucktown history book at the time, 2016, the publisher wanted me to, I wanted to highlight the improvements and the renovations. So it kind of went up to the present day.
Yeah.
Originally I wanted to focus on the turn of the 20th century and then the post 1980s history to the present, because so much of downtown Davenport has changed and redeveloped, and they've made a concerted effort to restore historic buildings. So a lot of the apartments, and there's a lot of new buildings, obviously. The Figgy is new, and then a number of the apartment buildings are new, but like Restoration St. Louis did with the Black Hawk Hotel, and with Current Iowa. Current Iowa was a historic renovation too, where Up Sky Bar is located. There's so many developers that wanted to restore, not just tear down, but wanted to restore these historic buildings. So the book also got into a lot of those changes and how things have really improved.
Another significant piece of your writing career dates us back to an essay about COVID that I would love for you to chat about. Surviving 2020 in the Quad Cities. That was something put together by the Midwest Writing Center.
Right. So I can't remember the timeline, but Midwest Writing Center is such a great resource for so many activities and workshops and readings. And they do an annual writers conference that they just had at Augustana, the David R. Collins Writers Conference. They do the Atlas. They have young emerging writers workshops where they serve young writers. They wanted an anthology. It was kind of nicknamed the Disaster Anthology. And they wanted people's experience to write how they survived 2020. And I'm gonna make me cry here too, but 2020 was so hard for everyone, but I got laid off March 6th of 2020. And I play piano, so I was playing for Music Guild, the Secret Garden. They were doing the musical Secret Garden through late January through February and March. So the week after I was laid off, it was March 13th of 2020. Because of COVID, everything shut down. So Music Guild had to cancel 2 weeks before we were supposed to open. So I did, for quadcities.com, I did kind of an essay on, I can't remember the theme of it, but it was similar in terms of what happened during 2020. And then I saw Midwest Writing Center was looking for submissions, and they didn't want the book to be just depressing and just a litany of woes and people just hard times. They wanted stories of resilience and surviving, succeeding, making it through 2020. And it was, I think, probably about 4,000 words altogether, but obviously I finished it before I started with Channel 4 here. And the whole book is a collection of essays, poetry, some illustrations, just a wide variety. A lot of people who are not professional writers. I think I may have been the only Quad City media person to submit something. But it was how you grew, how everybody grew, made it through, succeeded, literally survived. And I kind of ended it, you try to end it on a hopeful note where as a journalist, I got to write about how all the cultural institutions in the Quad Cities closed, reopened, changed. Everybody went virtual, how people adapted. So I got to see firsthand about how other people survived as well and were able, people like Circa and the theaters and the symphony, how they kept their business going. And as a journalist, I think my last line was, this is like being a veteran of a war. You're surviving this war. And I said, I, can't wait to write its last chapter.
How did the like art, art and culture locations that you wrote about, how did they take the essay? Did you get any feedback on it, whether they, whether they agreed with you on it, or if they,
I didn't
liked it, or
I didn't get a ton of feedback. I mean, I think people I write about usually are really supportive and really appreciate being mentioned and having having their organization featured. And I know, I mean, I did a few events where, I did some readings where, it was hard to actually read the essay. But I think every theater, every organization was grateful to have, their subscribers and their audiences still want their content. When people were shut down, people were stuck in their homes, like me, you're hungry for either distraction or inspiration, and every music or theater or art organization still found a way, mainly online. And one of the, they still want to get their content out there. And one of the most innovative things I think I wrote about was the now Common Chord, but the RME had done those curbside concerts. Literally, they went out to people's homes. So people couldn't go to concerts inside. So they went out to neighborhoods, backyards, sidewalks, curbs. And sorry, they literally brought the music to people. And
yeah,
they had hundreds, I think hundreds of those concerts. And that was just such an innovative, creative way. And artists are creative by their nature. And just for people, and one band, I think the A.V. Grouse band was one of many bands I wrote about. They did at least weekly, like Facebook Live, or they did online concerts where, you want that connection. Being isolated, you want that connection with other people.
Yeah.
Especially with music and artists. And so as a musician myself, I don't know if I could bring myself to like record myself every week and just to put myself out there like that, but they found a way to still make that connection.
You were the best person to write that article or essay because you have like the, writing journalism background and you're part of that world. So you were able to like see what was happening, be part of it, and express it so that other people could understand too.
Right. And yeah, I mean, during COVID, it was just so strange to, a lot of Zoom interviews or online interviews and interviews with people outside. Or I remember just having like my first interview back at Circa and just, talking to people behind masks, and not seeing people's faces was hard. And
right.
Some, Music Guild did some shows where all the actors were wearing masks, and that kind of obviously presents logistical problems being heard through their masks. And it was a crazy time. But like writing a historical book, I mean, COVID is such an important event in the world's history. And so how it affected people in the Quad Cities, it was really amazing just to be part of documenting that history. And so as a journalist, you're living through history every day, and you're getting to write about important events. And I remember going to the Vibrant Arena press conference where I think it was August last year, they invited people. It was in the arena, obviously, and so that was about the name change. They were announcing the new name change, and that was history. I mean, that was the first time the Mark name had been, the original Mark was in '93, and several years, and obviously people always called it the Mark, and they never iWireless or TaxSlayer. And this was Vibrant is the credit union, and it's based in the Quad Cities, so it's this local company. It's the first time the local company took on, invested in the name change. And that was the first time I was back in the arena since before COVID. And it was just so strange it was kind of an honor that I got to cover it for now the station. And you know, luckily, one of my favorite assignments before COVID was I got to review Paul McCartney at the arena
Oh,
in
wow.
June of 2019, and I think that was the last concert pre-COVID I was at. And you know the prices for Paul McCartney. I could never afford that if I didn't get a comp seat, and luckily my seat was like 11th row center, and that was the first time
Yes.
I'd seen him in concert, and that was just amazing.
Something we're seeing in tourism ever since, the COVID crisis has simmered down and things are fully open again. We're well beyond the, mask requirements and stuff. And we are seeing like that surge of people. I mean, I think they call it revenge tourism, where they're like, I've been cooped up for so long, I have to
I
get out and I
know.
have to do things. So we are seeing that. It's real. People are coming into our community just to blow off steam and just to have fun. And that's where I'm going to pull it up again. If you're watching the YouTube version, I've got the 100 things to do in the Quad Cities book. Like, that's where things like this are just so valuable and so helpful, because like we're back, we're in person, we're here, grab a guide and go. And at Visit Quad Cities, we are more than willing and able to help kind of customize an experience for people who are
Right.
coming to visit our community as well.
And I mean, these, like I said, these are all local, unique to the Quad Cities. They're all places that deserve to be supported. And even if it's just out, I mean, they're outdoor parks, and like the riverfront walkways are amazing and beautiful. And I think I included one of my wife and son's favorite kind of hobbies during COVID was to go to Black Hawk State Historic Site and just walk the trails there. And I'd never really, I'd been to Black Hawk Park before, but you come with a new appreciation. You're outdoors, you're appreciating what the area has. And yeah, I think even if you've lived your whole life in the Quad Cities, there are places like Mockingbird or the Up Sky Bar or River Room you might not have been to before.
Yeah.
I got, one of my promo things, I got to be on Paula Sands a number of months ago, and she had me on for the Bucktown book, so she said she remembered, she was really enjoyed that book, but
Yeah.
she's obviously been here her whole life, and she said, I've never been to some of these places. It's you gotta check off all 100.
Yes, you have to check. And I'm going to put you on the spot a tiny bit. So given your good writing skills, what you've invested in, your experiences here in the Quad Cities, I want to hear the official Jonathan Turner suggestion. If you got 8 hours on a sunny and 75 day in the Quad Cities, what are you going to recommend somebody go do?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'd recommend walking along Bend and Butterworth Parkway in Moline. Like I said, I'm a big fan of the places at the Bend. I mean, the Bend in East Moline. One of my favorite restaurants that's relatively new is Jenny's Boxcar, a Mexican restaurant. So they have an amazing mural inside Jenny's Boxcar that's near the Bend. Midwest Ale Works is one of the great craft breweries that's at the Bend. And if you have a designated driver, like I do usually, you have to check out Midwest Ale Works and the River Room. Go to the River Room at sunset, around sunset. They're on the top floor of the Hyatt at the Bend in East Moline. And the River Room is facing west, so they're obviously right on the river, and they have, if the weather is right, they have great views of the sunset.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And at this point, I would like you to fill in the blank. QC, that's where.
There's always something fun to do close by, and it's at a very affordable price.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So just again, want to reiterate that we have the 100 Things to Do in the Quad Cities books at both of our destination centers, Moline and Davenport. You can always check out that and the brief history of Bucktown on our online, visit quadcities.com/shop.
Also, if I can also mention a couple other places, the book is also available at the Putnam Gift Shop, at the Artsy Bookworm on 30th Street in Rock Island. It's at Barnes & Noble, North Park, and it's also at Crafted Quad Cities, which also just opened a new location at the Betplex in Bettendorf.
Excellent. So get checking off this 100 tick list of things to do in the Quad Cities. Thank you so much, Jonathan. This was really fun. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for all your time. I appreciate being on. Thanks, Katrina.
Thanks for listening to QC, That's Where, a podcast powered by Visit Quad Cities. Text Visit QC to 38314 for insider events, activities, and updates sent straight to your phone. That's VISITQC, one word, to 38314. Message and data rates may apply.